Okay, so service life model benchmarking using data collected from marine exposure sites. I've shown some, but not all of this data in previous meetings. I'm going to be talking about two models here, Life 365, showing the governing equations there for chloride ingress, and the second equation showing the effect of age and temperature and how this impacts the diffusion coefficient at any time t and temperature t. The model works by using an initial 28-day diffusion coefficient, which is based on empirical data and based on water cementing material ratio and silica fume content of that concrete. And then it has a diffusion decay coefficient, M, which is largely controlled by the amount of fly ash or slag in the concrete. The model assumptions, we've seen two-phase model before, so don't really need to do that. The model determines a relationship between the surface concentration and time based on the type, location, exposure of a structure. This is adjusted for membranes and sealers. The early age diffusion coefficient and the decay coefficient are based on mixed proportions. The chloride threshold CT is based on the type of the steel and the presence of corrosion inhibitor. The model predicts time to corrosion using time and temperature D, and predicts time to cracking or first repair based on an assumed propagation period. So I think many people are familiar with this model. It's been around for 20 years or so. I'm going to be comparing this model with a more recently developed model that was incorporated in Texas Concrete Works. Texas Concrete Works is developed predominantly to predict temperature rise and gradients and risk of thermal cracking, but it does incorporate a model to predict chloride ingress and the time to corrosion initiation. The algorithms were very similar to Life 365. We did modify the surface concentration versus time and the diffusion versus time relationship, and also extended the model to allow for the use of metacheolin and ultrafine fly ash, both of which are used in the state of Texas. Notwithstanding that, the models will give very similar output. So this is just the way we deal with the surface concentration. Life 365 uses a bilinear relationship, allowing a buildup with time up to a maximum value. With Concrete Works, we allowed that to vary more smoothly. Doesn't make much difference. Both models will react the same with regards to membranes and silane. The other main difference with Concrete Works is we decided, again, a bilinear relationship for D versus T was not appropriate. So Concrete Works uses a similar relationship, but allows decay down to an ultimate diffusion value, which is based on the assumption of complete hydration. And we assume that by letting T go to 100 to calculate what the ultimate hydration is. Both models incorporate CNI as a corrosion inhibitor, and the CNI has an impact on the threshold concentration, as you can see in this graph here. For modeling in a marine environment, we believe it is close enough to assume that the convection zone plays little part in the transportation of chlorides, especially for things in the tidal zone, which get saturated twice a day, 6 hours twice a day. So there really isn't much impact for convection. Of course, as you move up a column in a marine zone and get up into the splash zone, the convection zone will become more important, as it will also for highway structures. A lot of our data, we've got data from about 3 different marine exposure sites that I was going to share with you today. But when I found out we only had 20 minutes and 2 of those were for questions, I decided to restrict it, but the full details will be in any written paper. This is a very well-known marine exposure site. It's in the Bay of Fundy off the coast of Eastport, Maine. It's been around since 1935. It has been used for a wide variety of products. What you can see there is the mid-tide wharf, where we get somewhere in the region of about 100 freeze-thaw cycles per annum. And that's if we measure at a depth of about 2 inches below the surface. If we measure closer to the surface, then the number of freeze-thaw cycles could approach 160 to 200 per year. So quite an aggressive environment, that together with the highest tides in the world. In the summer of 2003, a series of concrete blocks reached an age of 25 years of age, and this started our process of validation. We thought, well, let's bring these blocks back and look at things like chloride profiles and other parameters. Our first series of blocks had 3 water cementing materials ratio and 4 different levels of slag. I'm only going to show you the data for the 0.4 water cementing materials ratio. We found at the higher water cementing materials ratio, some of the blocks with the higher slag levels suffered a little bit of surface deterioration due to de-isosalt scaling. Here are the chloride profiles at 25 years. So you can see the impact of slag. If you look at a depth of 50 millimeters, for instance, it's quite clear that the chloride content that's reaching the 50 millimeter zone or 2-inch zone is restricted quite significantly by the presence of slag. We input the data into Li365 and we didn't tell the model anything except the mixed proportions, in other words, the water cement ratio of the slag content, and the location of the structure, and that it was in the tidal zone, and the model did everything else. It predicted the surface history, chloride surface history for the tidal zone, predicted the temperature history, and then we asked it to predict profiles for 25 years, which it did, much smoother than our real profiles, but those are the data. And what I'm going to show is as we apply these to each of the mixes, each of the 4 mixes here, these are the slag blocks without slag, 25-year profiles of the circular points of prediction from Li365 is the curved line, 25% slag, 45% slag, and 65% slag. So we found this very encouraging. And as a result of this, we've been following up on this almost every year. That first year, 2003, we collected blocks that were produced in 1978. Didn't want that to happen. And every year, we've been bringing back different blocks, different programs as they've also reached 25 years. So you can see a year later, we had mixes with fly ash and ternary blends of fly ash and slag. Following year, more mixes with slag, then mixes with fly ash, mixes with very high levels of slag, up to 80%, mixes with silica fume, ternary blends of silica fume and fly ash, high volume fly ash concrete mixes. So we've had an opportunity to bring back a lot of concrete as it reaches 25 years of age to see if Li365 could model this just based on those simple input parameters. That shows a data dump of all of our mixes at a 0.4 water cement ratio. It excludes the high volume fly ash concretes because they were a low water cementing materials ratio. But what's clear here is just very, very quickly, just a quick and dirty look. You can see the very significant impact of having SEMs in these mixes at a depth of 35 millimeters. The chloride contents are at least half those in mixes without SEMs. And the difference has actually become more marked as you get down to 50 millimeters. So I'm just going to show you some snippets of the data. I'm not going to show you all of the data, but here's some concrete containing 6.5% silica fume and 13.6 fly ash. It was a first experiment with a ternary blend out there. So the profiles are the red points for 2 different mixes after 25 years, and actually 3 different mixes after 25 years, and showing the real data, the measured data, and then there's a line for Li365, which seems to fit very well to these data. And we've had other concrete out there that's outside of that. All of those mixes were cast by CAMMET. In 1996, some concrete during the construction of the Hibernia GBS, gravity-based structure, they placed some concrete blocks out at Tree Island to try and monitor from the mix production for the platform. And these were placed out there in 96. We tested them 12 years later. We've since tested them in 20 years. I don't have that data in this slide deck, but the results are pretty much similar. So a typical high performance concrete mix, 0.33 water cement to materials ratio, 8.5% silica fume. And in this case, a lightweight aggregate. And what we found with a lightweight aggregate is when we did the prediction for Li365, Li365 would normally push that surface concentration through at 1% for a tidal zone. But here, because of the lightweight aggregate and the increased porosity of a surface, we actually found that the chloride contents of a surface were higher. And this is the first time we actually had to adjust one of our input parameters based on the characteristics of a concrete, because porosity clearly affects the surface concentration. But still, we were able to get a very good fit once we made that modification. As I said, we got profiles for another 20 mixes or so at Tree Island. I don't want to belabor all of those. A lot of it's been published. There will be a summary paper on this and on some of the problems when you try to take Li365 out of the marine environment, because we do, or out of a tidal environment, because we do see some problems. So here was an opportunity to take a look at the Confederation Bridge that crosses between New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. It's about an 8-mile long bridge. It was open to traffic in '97, and a beautiful looking structure. And we profiled it at an age of 20 years, and we took profiles both from the piers at different elevations on the piers and also from the ice shields. And you can see the different mix designs there. There's some similarity. The ice shields, though, because of abrasion resistance, they were targeting 100 MPa concrete, but otherwise fairly similar looking concretes. So what we found here is the blue line here that's shown at a height above mean tide level of +1. This is really the only concrete that can be considered in either the upper part of the tidal zone or the lower part of a splash zone. All of these other lines here are for higher elevations, so they're 3.5, 9, and 15 meters above the mid-tide level. And that's obviously going to have an impact on, a much bigger impact on the microclimate, with regards to surface loading and other factors as well. And really, in this situation here, we could only really fit Li365 to the profile from the mid-tide level, and it's a pretty good fit. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty good fit. But you can see as you go up the column to higher elevations up the column, Li365 is, of course, completely over-predicting the ingress, and we can expect that. And I think this is one of the next challenges for some of these models to make them truly predictive, is somehow better characterizing the surface loading environment, because it, especially in highway structures and in the splash zone and marine structures, or I should say the spray zone in the marine structures, these surface loadings are going to be very different from location with a location, even on the same element. Just to show some other data from other sites, this is from a site in Norway, concrete containing silica fume. I'll skip over that, but again, Li365 was able to capture the profiles at 7 years, 14 years, and 21 years without really any other instruction about except for being told the exposure conditions and the composition of the concrete. I'm going to skip over this because I don't have time to cover it. This was going to be another part of the paper. But I would like to talk briefly about some data from the UK where concrete's been exposed in the splash zone. It's set well back from the sea, but frequently gets splashed. And here we had 3 different mixes and only 6 different ages of chloride profiles before the blocks were stolen and used for anchors. But we were able to, again, in this situation here, because we were in the splash zone, we had to back calculate surface concentrations. And when we were able to do that, we were able to capture the profiles quite nicely once we were able to get a guesstimate of the surface concentration. So again, working for splash zone concrete. Validation to progress, we're reasonably confident that Light 365 can provide a good estimate, the chloride profile in both the tidal and the splash zone. We still need more work to look at time to corrosion initiation, as we need more work on the chloride threshold. And we also need more work to characterize what happens under marine spray conditions or concretes that are exposed periodically to de-icing salts like highway structures. Being able to capture the marine, the splash zone in a column in a marine structure is probably, even though we can only capture that properly, it's probably the most aggressive part of the structure in the sense that we have both chlorides and oxygen to drive the corrosion process in that location. But clearly, as we move up the column, our relationships between chlorides and time is going to be very different, and we need to better characterize this. I'm going to just spend 30 seconds just talking about validation for highway structures. We've looked at a lot of highway structures. This is a structure in Lansing, Michigan, which we looked at 25 years after salt exposure, 3 different mixes with different levels of fly ash. Concrete looked pretty good at 25 years. And the profiles, the fly ash concrete was clearly capable of screening the chlorides out of the concrete. But when we tried to fit Light 365 to this, what we found is Light 365 just had no idea where that surface concentration would be and completely over-predicted the profiles. But once we educated the model and told it what the surface concentration should be, it was pretty good at actually modeling the ingress. So this is just some another emphasis on where we need more work. Our biggest uncertainty for highway and parking structures is to characterize the microclimate, especially with regards to the chloride exposure, which can vary widely within location, even on the same structural element. So the big question is for predictive models for highway structures, what do we use for CS?